But you just said that genetics is not the most important part of the equation. So if genetics isn't at the top of the list, what is?
Well, you have a choice. You can make yourself stay healthy, or you can let yourself be unhealthy. It's entirely up to you.
Benjamin Franklin is credited with writing many years ago that there are two certainties in life. One is death and one is taxes. Let me assure you that if I have anything to do with this podcast is not going to be about taxes. However, it is going to be about putting off death. So we want to welcome you to Living Longer. Hello, everybody. I'm Pam Huff, and I worked as a television journalist in Birmingham, Alabama for 50 years. And now, here that I am in my golden years, as they call it, I want to continue to be active and alive and curious. And I want to know just how well I can keep my brain going, how I can keep my body going. I want to be vibrant into my really old years. So joining me in being able to help in these discussions and answer our questions and bring in experts who can answer our questions is Dr. Stephen Austad. Stephen is a distinguished professor at University of Alabama at Birmingham. He holds the Protective Life Endowed Chair in Healthy Age Research and is a much sought after speaker not only in this country but abroad. You're going to be fascinated just by his own history and what he has accomplished, much less who he can bring in to help us with living longer. Together, Steve and I, in fact, are going to introduce you to many of his world-renowned colleagues who are working to try to figure out how do we age and how can we modify this aging process so we can live longer, healthier lives. Does that summarize what we're going to try to do?
I think you did a great job of summarizing it, much better than I could have done.
Well, gee, thank you. So much has been written, Steve, in all honesty, about aging and the aging process and all of that. And some of it is very valuable, but I think you would probably agree with me. Some of it is also just hogwash.
Absolutely.
It's nothing that's going to modify the world as we would like to.
No, it's the kind of thing that, as a friend of mine says, gives you very expensive urine.
Well, we don't need any more of that. I have a series of just 3 questions that I want to ask you and see what your response is on just a yes-no kind of deal.
Okay.
Number 1, can we stop the aging process?
No.
Can we erase some of the damage that perhaps we did in our younger years before we got smart?
Yes.
Is genetics, and this is the one that really interests me, is genetics the most important part of determining an individual life, how long we live?
No.
And that, to me, is the most fascinating part, because my whole life I've been told it's in the genes, it is what it is, you can't change it. But you just said that genetics is not the most important part of the equation. So if genetics isn't at the top of the list, what is?
What is lifestyle. Well, you have a choice. You can make yourself stay healthy, or you can let yourself be unhealthy. It's entirely up to you. And the decisions that you make early in life, of course, set you on a trajectory.
Sure.
But at any point, there's a way to jump off the trajectory you're on and onto a different trajectory.
And that's why they say, even if you've been smoking your whole life, you can always quit and it can make a difference.
It can make a difference.
That's just one example.
This is actually one of the more interesting things that come out of research in the last 10 years is that even very late in life, it can make a difference. You know, nobody ever used to think about asking 90-year-olds to start lifting weights. But now they do.
Yeah.
And they get these incredible improvements in their strength.
See, you just gave me the transition talking about a 90-year-old. I want to talk about a 102-year-old Japanese man. His name is Kokichi Akazawa, 102 years old, and he just made history in August of 2025 when he became the oldest person to summit Mount Fuji, which of course is Japan's highest mountain. The interesting thing about this is that he broke his own record that he had set back just a few years before. He was 96 when he set that one. He became the oldest person then to scale Mount Fuji. This time he climbed with his daughter. Now think about this. His daughter is 70. So I'm 72. His daughter is 70. climbed also with his granddaughter and her husband and 4 of his friends. And in all honesty, he does credit them with helping him get to the top. He's had some health issues, diabetes, I think, heart issues, went through shingles, fell, had some stitches, and he says this will be his last climb. But how is he able to do that? And other people would just laugh at that. 102 years old.
Yeah, let's put this climb in some sort of perspective. So Mount Fuji is about 12,000 feet.
Yeah.
The place that he left from is about 10 miles from the summit. And in that 10 miles, it goes up over 5,000 feet.
Wow.
So that's a major climb for pretty much anybody.
Yeah.
So how did he do this? Well, first of all, he did have some help from genetics. One of the things, overall, genes play a relatively small role in longevity. But for people that live to 100 or more, genes play a bigger role in that. But he also benefited from a lifetime of physical activity. He'd been a mountain climber his whole life.
Started young.
Yeah, so he really took care of himself all the way along, and he kept at it. He didn't get discouraged because it took him longer than it used to. On this last trip, it actually took him 3 days to do that.
All of 3 days.
3 days. But part of it is motivation. Yeah. You know, he wanted to do this. He wanted to set this record. And this is a record that may never be broken.
Sure, 102. It's amazing. And I probably will come back, maybe not in this podcast, but in another, and talk more about why, if you do live to be 100, genetics does play a more major role in that. Another headline-making moment recently. This one kind of freaked me out, weirded me out in certain ways. Chinese leader Xi Jinping was caught on one of those hot mic moments, you know, when he wasn't really supposed to be talking to the general public, but he was with Russian President Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And they were talking about the possibility of living to be 150. Now, both Xi and Putin are in their 70s, and of course, Kim Jong-un is in his 40s, so he's the baby of the group. But Xi was heard saying this: now people in their 70s are still young. I like that part of it. Putin responded by saying, in a few years, with the development of biotechnology, human organs can be constantly transplanted so that people can live younger and younger and even become immortal. Wishful thinking of some powerful leaders, but there's substance to what they're talking about in some ways.
There are already a lot of people living on what you could call manufactured time. They would have died a few years ago, and people get heart transplants and liver transplants and kidney transplants. But there's a limit on what you can do with that. Right. And I think that Putin is biologically naive, as you might expect for a politician. Because
another whole topic.
What happens when you need a brain transplant?
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing that's really unique about our brains is that most of our body is sort of replenishing itself all the time.
All the time.
But our brain, that's not true. Our brain, you pretty much have all the brain cells that you were born with.
Okay.
And so when your brain cells get damaged, that damage is pretty permanent. Now, when you come to transplanting your brain, you could really think of that as transplanting your body just as easily, I think. But what would that do to your personality? What would it do to your memories? I mean, you have to think, is that going to be the same person? So also, doesn't take account of things like cancer. Cancer, you know, you could transplant the organ, but if the cancer spread all over, you can't transplant everything.
Sure.
So it was interesting that they're having this conversation at the age they are, when they're thinking about, well, how much later am I going to be in power? Yeah. And I'm just thinking of Kim Jong-un sitting back there chuckling, being 30 years younger. Because not only is he 30 years younger, but he has 30 years more of scientific progress that can come along to help him out.
But you actually have a bet out there in the world with a demographer, and you are betting that a person, if I understand it, a person who is alive right now in 2025 will live to be 150?
Yes, and I think, actually I have to think that she probably knew about this bet. I like to tell myself that he probably knew about this bet. That's where he got this idea about 150.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is that we're making rapid progress in understanding why we age and how we age. And so that I'm thinking that we will come up with something in the next few years that will allow us to slow the aging process. Now, to win my bet, people often misunderstand this bet. I'm not saying that life expectancy will get to 150.
For everyone, it's going to be 150.
One person, only one person has to reach that in order for me to win my bet. So it's going to be a woman, of course, because women live longer.
We're survivors.
Women are survivors. They have a genius for surviving that makes us males very, very jealous. But the other thing is they have to be cognitively intact. And that is, they have to be able to carry on a conversation. Just having a zombie that doesn't know where she is live that long, that doesn't count.
Sure.
And I'm quite confident that I'm going to win. And one of the things we calculated, this initial bet with the compound interest to the year 2150, when the bet matures, will be worth about $1 billion.
Somebody's going to inherit a nice little chunk.
Somebody is. In the best case, I would.
You would.
In the more likely case, it would be my grandchildren, let's say. Yeah.
Sure, okay. But that is truly amazing, because even right now, I think I read just recently, the oldest woman was like 116 or 17. So we're getting in that time frame. 150 is not that far removed. And so maybe you do stand a really good chance.
Yeah, so this is the way I think about it. Jay Olshansky, the person with whom I have the bet, likes to point out that Jean Calment, who's the oldest person that we know that has really valid birth and death dates, lived to be 122. And she died in 1997.
Okay.
And since then, no one has come close to that. No one's ever reached even 120. So he says, aha.
Gotcha.
Yeah, gotcha. Almost 30 years now. But I'm saying, well, this doesn't have to happen overnight. All we need to do is come up with some anti-aging treatments. Yeah. And one of the things that we've learned in the last few years is that these things can be effective even when started relatively late in life. We used to think the earlier you start them, the better they're going to work. But now that's not necessarily true. We've found in mice drugs that if you give it to a mouse when it's the human equivalent of 60 or 70 years, has a dramatic impact on the remaining lifespan.
That's impressive.
Might increase it by 30 or 40%.
Wow.
So,
which could get you to that 150.
Which will, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I remain confident that I'm going to win.
Well, Stephen, you and I may not be here, but good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm all for it. You raised an issue, though, there, that you said that you wanted whoever got to that point still to be able to communicate and be able to function, if you will. When you talk about longevity, there are issues beyond just living that I think that you can't ignore, that you have to talk about. Dementia, obviously, is one of them. Also, financial security. I mean, today people are going, is my 401k going to last long enough? Or I don't have a 401k. How am I going to feed myself if I live past whatever? And so I think we have to talk about health span as opposed to lifespan. How do we make this life of ours longer, but also enjoy it and be able to to take care of ourselves? And that's not an easy answer right now, is it?
No, and you hit on a key point. And for many years, I didn't like talking about longevity. I like talking about prolonging health. And that's because I think people have this image of, okay, well, I know this 90-year-old who's in really bad shape,
And I don't want to be there.
No, bedridden, demented.
Right.
And are you talking about maybe making that person survive another 30 years? And that's not what we're about in the research community. What we're about is adding health to those years when we're still healthy. In other words, what we'd really like to do is compress that period of ill health towards the end of life. That's really a goal. And right now, surprisingly, with traditional medical approach, we're doing the opposite. So we're becoming better and better and better at keeping people alive. The people that used to die from heart attacks now are surviving. But we're keeping people alive in worse health. So life expectancy is still going up, although it's slowed. Health expectancy's kind of stopped. And so we got to figure out something, because we don't want to continue along that path with life expectancy continuing to increase, but health expectancy remaining flat.
I'm kind of that persuasion where I want to be here today and just gone tomorrow, you know, we can't pick and choose how we do it, but if the medical community is at least in sync with understanding how we have to do what you just described, not just lengthen life, but make life worth living at that point, I think, then we're on the right track.
We are. And one of the things that's important, because I think dementia is one of the things that worries people the most.
Absolutely.
Of all the diseases of aging that we know about, there is none that's so responsive to the environment, to your lifestyle decisions as dementia. We know that education, remaining mentally active, even exercise, prolongs your healthy period of your healthy brain. And that's really important. This is something you really can do something about, and people need to understand that dementia is not destiny.
Even if it's in your family history.
Well, it depends on how it's in your family history. There are 3 genes that we know about that if you get those genes, you're going to get dementia without any question. And usually at a fairly young age, like 50 instead of 70
early
or
onset.
80.
Yeah.
Right. However, my suspicion is even in those cases, you can delay it with the right lifestyle factors. Now, there's no evidence to support that right now, but from what we know about how dementia progresses, everything tells us that there's a lot of influence on lifestyle on it. So listen to the advice that we'll come up with again and again in this show about the healthiest lifestyle, and think that even if it's in your family, you have some control over when it might strike you.
Going back to what I said in the beginning, genetics isn't everything. It sounds like if we listen and work toward it, we can indeed lengthen a healthy life.
Yeah, and the other point is if you do that, and let's say you lengthen your period of non-dementia by 5 years, that's 5 years more for us to do research to try to come up with cures or better and better preventative.
And they're happening. I'm going to close with this, and I don't want to put it on a downer, but this kind of made me sad in so many ways. I know you know Stanford psychologist Dr. Laura Carsten, say the name for me.
Carstensen.
Okay, Carstensen. And she wrote this about longevity. Older people are more pro-social, more likely to give to others, more emotionally even-handed, and more likely to forgive. They have fewer negative emotions. They're slower to anger and have accumulated knowledge and experience. It is an incredible resource that we've never had in human history. But then, she goes on to say, the problem is that people are born into a world that was largely built by and for young people. And that model doesn't work for century-long lives, which is what we're hoping for. Longevity, she says, is going to change almost all aspects of our lives. It will change education, how we work, when we get married, financial planning and security, when we decide to retire, how many jobs we have along that way, where we live, our health and our happiness. That's a lot to unpack and a lot to, I think, worry about.
Or on the other hand, instead of worrying about it, think about how you could change it. How you could make the city more friendly to older people. Let me just give you an example. So I teach a class at UAB on aging, and I have the students go down there to the hospital and measure how long the light is green for people walking across the street. And then we calculate the average walking speed of a person that's 80 years old. We say, this needs to change. And there's lots of things like the size of street signs. That's something that's very easy, but it makes it difficult for older drivers to see. What we do with people that are retired, people are not at the end when they retire these days. There's lots of things. Well, you could host a podcast, for instance, but you could also work with kids to teach them reading. You could do all kinds of community activities that we really haven't thought about this, but we've really changed the trajectory of how we age. 100 years ago, when somebody got to be 65, they could no longer do the manual labor they used to, and so they were kind of put out to pasture. But now we know 65-year-olds that are doing everything. I mean, Rupert Murdoch just stepped down from the head of Fox. He was 92. You know, that would have been unheard of 100 years ago. So we're in control. I mean, we're spoiled. We're baby boomers, right? The world has bent to our wishes for our whole
And
lives.
we're not giving up.
And so here we are,
Here we
and we're
are.
going to do it one more time and
Yeah.
make the world a much friendlier place for older people.
Oh, Steve, I hope you're right about that. And I hope that you have enjoyed our first introduction of Living Longer. So for Dr. Steve Austad, I'm Pam Huff. Here's to living longer.